Good evening, or good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is where you are. I'm recording here on Sunday afternoon live from my man cave. Welcome to On High Hoops, Big E's podcast with a Johnnies bias. This will be a Johnnies centric episode as we recap the Players Era Championship. My name Frank Malfetta, and I am on high. So without further ado, let's just get into another disappointing MTE for St. John's. Went down to Vegas. I was down there. I got in on Sunday. Had a lovely little day Sunday watching football, betting on the games from the sports book. And then, of course, Monday rolls around to spoil the fun. The Johnnies played afternoon against Iowa State University, and they lost 83 to 82. A game that was just super tight and nip tuck all the way, but ultimately ended in a heartbreaking Johnnies loss. Johnnies bounced back on Tuesday, same time around 2 p.m., with a 96-81 15-point victory over Baylor. It was an excellent performance, a great response from the team. And then they came back on Wednesday, and I can give you some thoughts on the Players Era later, but total shit show of a MTE. So that's a whole nother story. But eventually found out we were playing Auburn on Wednesday. I believe that game tipped at about 5 o'clock, and we lost that one 85-74, a game that was probably a little closer than that 11-point margin would have you believe. So let's go ahead and take these one by one, break them down, talk about them, and talk about the big picture here. So Iowa State, coming into this game, I think I was nervous at least about Tamin Lipsey. Obviously, he's an elite guard. He's a guard that can kill you like those Bama guards can. So that was something that, I wanted to keep an eye on. And I figured, worst case scenario, if you let Tamin Lipsey go off, just focus on containing the rest of that team and things would be fine. I think from a containing Lipsey perspective, the Johnnies actually did great. They held them to just 16 points on under 30% from the field, 5 of 17 shooting. He seemed to come up with a couple clutch buckets, but by and large was not as much of a factor offensively as I would have expected. The downside, though, Milan Momcilovic absolutely went off. He was 5 of 9 from deep, 55% shooting, posting 23 points. He hit a couple of big buckets down the stretch as well. The other thing that scared me about this game was the turnovers. Iowa State, notorious for their ball pressure in the TJ Otzelberger era. They were 96th percentile in the country in turnovers forced coming to this game, forcing 18.4 turnovers per game. But again, I think St. John's did a pretty good job here. Only 10 turnovers. That's just 12% of possessions. That's a 75th percentile turnover rate, so that's pretty good from a Johnny's perspective. So what's the problem then? Why did we lose this game? Well, it's pretty simple. The game was lost on the glass, on our defensive glass to be exact. We let ISU put up 17 offensive rebounds, and we had a defensive rebound rate of just 55.3%, which is just absolutely pathetic. That means they're grabbing almost as many offensive rebounds as we got defensive rebounds. And on those 17 offensive rebounds, they scored 22 second chance points. I mean, that's huge in a 1-point game. If you just snag a couple more of those rebounds, then, you win this game. The Momcilovic thing, it is what it is. The guy was unconscious. A lot of them were pretty well guarded. He got a couple open looks for sure, but for the most part, they were hands in his face, and they were from, farther out from the NBA line. But he had a great night. He came into the game in the last 3 games shooting just 6 of 20 for Iowa State. So, good for them that he decided to break out against us. And it's unfortunate, and that's one of those things that, it happens sometimes. You can play perfect defense. Not we definitely did not play perfect defense, but theoretically you could play perfect defense, and something like that could still happen where a guy just plays out of his mind, and there's nothing more to do about it. And all in all, I don't know, this game to me was a pretty good performance. Your 1 point loss, you're a bounce here or there away from having this thing go your way. You're a call here or there away from having this one go your way, and that's not to make excuses. That's not to jump onto a moral victory. But I'm here to talk about the games. I'm here to talk about the games objectively, and objectively, I think there were a lot of good things that happened in that game, along with some bad things. We talked about the rebounding, and that's going to be a theme on this particular episode of the podcast, but hopefully not a theme for the rest of the season, because I think it's something that we have the personnel to fix, and we should be able to fix. And if we don't fix, it's going to be a really, really long year for the Johnnies. So another loss to a top 10, top 15 opponent, not great. If you fancy yourself a top 10 or 15 team, as I think many of us thought this St. John's team was coming into the season, you got to find a way to win one of these games against a fellow top 10 or 15 team, and we have not. And that's just an undeniable fact. We were there. We were right there. We were up 1 with 2:09 to play after Sellers drilled another 3. Unfortunately, we didn't score again until the meaningless Dylan Mitchell layup at the buzzer. And what we saw there down the stretch was not a good offense. It was stagnant. There was not a lot of ball movement. They just forced a lot of bad shots. Sellers got in there and took a quick mid-range 2. That's a terribly advised shot. They'll give you that every time. You don't take that early in the shot clock. We forced things at the rim a couple times in those last 2 minutes, and by and large just did not look efficient on offense. And credit to Iowa State, they really clamped down the defense in those last 2 minutes. But we're supposed to be a good offense. We're supposed to be a top team. You find a way to score in those situations, and I think what we've seen so far and the difference between Alabama and St. John's and Auburn is those teams have a dude. Those teams know where the ball's going late. Those teams know where the ball's going when they need a bucket. And those guys play with that alpha mentality. And I think St. John's, we just don't know who that guy is yet. Feeding Zuby down low should be a priority in those spots. It should be a reliable source of buckets in those spots. But I don't think we've really seen the full potential and extent of that just yet. It certainly hasn't played out that way in these close games. It's not a coincidence that the guys that we've seen do this to us in clutch situations are all guards. The Bama guards, of course, Taman Lipsey here, although he did get injured late, so it was more Momcilovic in those last 2 minutes, and then of course Todd Pettiford in the Auburn game, which we'll get to. Again, an alpha guy who can go out and get a bucket with the ball in his hands late in a game. And I don't think this team doesn't have that. I think there's talent on the roster for that, and we'll talk about that later as well, but we have not seen it yet. And I mean, I'm not a Hall of Famer. I'm not an elite coach, but I have to get on here and talk about the good and the bad every game, as I just said. And, for my money, I think it was the game was poorly managed. I think the late game situation was abysmally managed, frankly. You have the ball with 10 seconds left. You need a 3 to win the game. Well, you're down 2 there on the free throw line, about to make it 3 with their second shot. You send Ian Jackson. No, you send Josen Sanone into the game, or Sannon into the game, and rather than take out Dylan Mitchell, who's a non-shooter, who's a non-factor in a situation where you need a 3, rather than take him off the floor to get Sannon, another shooter, on the floor, you bring in Sannon for Jackson, taking a shooter off of the floor. And yes, Sannon's a shooter too, but so is Jackson, and I would want both of them on the floor in that situation. So that was the first head scratcher. Iowa State makes the free throw to make it a 3-point game. 10 seconds left. You have a timeout. Isaiah Sellers was talking to Rick about taking the timeout right before the final free throw. For my money, you get that ball over half court, you take the timeout. And I mean, why not? There's no reason not to take the last time out there that I could think of. You've got an unconscious 3-point shooter in Sellers who was 5 of 6 from deep at that point in the game. On the day, that was his final stat line. You don't have your point guard in the game. Dylan Darling had fouled out. The offense had not gotten a good look in 2 full minutes. So for my money, you get that ball over half court, you take the timeout and draw something up. The one thing I heard that can give me some hesitation is you don't want to give them time to foul or give them an opportunity to foul when you're up 3 and we were in the double bonus. I don't know Otzelberger or his tendencies, but they didn't look like they were ever going to foul us. They didn't foul us on the way up the court, which would have been a little early, but they ultimately didn't foul us at all for that entire play. So, I think even if you were concerned about that possibility, then draw something quick. Ozaya looked great on the catch and shoot. Draw a quick catch and shoot off the inbound pass with some screening action to get him open or get him a couple steps, however much space he needs. So, that catch and shoot there guards against the intentional foul. And I think the other thing working against that intentional foul up 3 situation there is, we're in this era with the new continuation rule this year. I think the refs are still learning how to apply it. I think the coaches and players are still learning how it works. And so I think fouling up 3 right now is an infinitely riskier proposition. A, because the continuation rule just exists now, and B, because there's been some inconsistencies in how it's been applied, and teams are a little unsure of what to expect from it. So I think all that militates in favor of taking the time out there. And, even if you don't want to take it, when you see Zuby isolated one-on-one, with the only option essentially being take a shot off the dribble with that was 6 seconds left, I think, when he put the shot up, or 5. Call the timeout a second before that with 7 seconds on the clock. Call that timeout, get the ball out of Zuby's hands from behind the arc, and draw up a play at that point. And we didn't see that again. So there was no timeout called on that last possession. Ultimately, we settled for a Zuby fadeaway 3-pointer that did not land. So performances a note there. Sellers, 20 points, 5 rebounds, 5 of 6 from deep. Zuby, 16 points, 9 rebounds, 5 assists, 5 of 9 from the field, a block and a steal. Dylan Mitchell, 12 points, 9 rebounds, and an assist off the bench, 2 blocks. Hopkins, 16, 7, and 3, only 3 of 10 from the field, so a bit inefficient, but it was good to see him putting some points on the board. So the next day, we got Baylor, as we all knew going in. Again, really good performance here. Obviously, a better performance than the Iowa State one, because we did end up winning this game. But again, that defensive glass is going to be the bane of this team's existence. Baylor also crushed us on the offensive glass. The D-rebounding percentage here, 49%, which is the 3rd percentile. That's that means they got more offensive rebounds than we had defensive rebounds. We had 25 defensive rebounds to their 26 offensive rebounds. That is just beyond pathetic. It's not a team that's particularly dominant inside either. It's a real head scratcher. I can't fathom why. I think some of it is on the guards. Zuby, for all of his skills, has never been a great defensive rebounder, and I think having elite rebounding guards both helped the situation last year, but also allowed him not to have to focus on being better of a defensive rebounder. I think a lot of the switches also can hurt sometimes, pulling guys away from the basket out onto the perimeter, some of our rebounders, and so I think that's something a good team will hunt for and try to do intentionally. Again, it was an issue that reared its head here. Thankfully, Baylor only scored 21 second chance points, which sounds like a lot, but on 26 rebounds, that's only less than a point per offensive rebound. Iowa State, Bama, and Auburn were all above that 1 point per offensive rebound mark, significantly higher than the rate for Baylor in this game. So, you did a good job of defending, I guess, those second chance points, which would be the silver lining here. But a lot of those were just missed bunnies and layups that a team like Baylor usually makes. We got a bit lucky on that front. Baylor couldn't throw the ball in the ocean. They had an effective field goal rate of just 42.3%, well below their season average of 53. And if you go in and you look and you apply the season shooting percentages from 2 and from 3 for Baylor, that and apply that to the amount of shots they took in this game, that gets you the extra 15 points they need to have made this a tie game. And so, I don't want to overblow how good the performance against Baylor was. It was a very good performance, but we also did get a bit lucky. And of course, the 15-point margin of victory I don't think is indicative. So even saying, hey, they would have had 15 more points if they just shot their averages, I don't think that gets you to a tie game because we were winning by 20-ish or maybe even above 20 when we started to take our foot off the gas and take some of the better players out. So I do think we still win that game and maybe still win it pretty easily, but still worth noting there. Performances of note in this game: Hopkins, 26 points, 5 boards, 5 assists, a steal, and a block, 9 of 12 from the field, and a perfect 3 of 3 from deep. Outstanding performance for Hopkins. Isaiah Sellers, 22 points, 2 boards. He had a block, 6 of 11 from the field, 5 of 7 from deep. Dylan Mitchell, 18, 6, and 6 off the bench, added a block and a steal, 8 of 10 from the field. Ian Jackson, I want to give a big shout out here. It was a great offensive performance from Ian. 14 points, 3 boards, and an assist, 5 of 7 from the field, 3 of 4 from deep. The downside, he did have 3 turnovers, which is going to limit him and continue to, keep him from playing the big minutes that we really need from him if he can't get those turnovers sorted out. Zuby, quiet in this game, but did have 6 boards and 4 assists. Sanin was awful. Could not throw the ball in the ocean in against ISU and Baylor, but I did want to give him a little shout right here because, he pulled down 5 defensive boards, and I know Rick has harped on that of the guards getting involved in rebounding more, and obviously I just mentioned it when we're talking about defensive rebounds, and Sanin did give you some really positive boards in that regard here, so worth shouting him out as well. Auburn, this game just fucking sucked. I had a bad feeling from the opening few minutes. The team just looked flat as can be, and while I think they snapped out of that flatness and came to life later in the first half and into the early second half, the bad vibes just never left. It was a dead gym. Both fan bases had left. So it just was not a fun atmosphere, not a fun game. This one probably wasn't as bad as the 11-point margin indicates. We were tied with 7 minutes to play. We even held a 7-point lead at multiple points in the second half. And we led the game for almost 18 minutes, 17:57, and Auburn only led for 18:01. So, it was a nip-tuck game. It wasn't really an 11-point game. They closed on a 22-11 run down the stretch when we could not keep up. I think offensively, the biggest issue in this game for us was, we got away from the paint in the second half. Robbie Hummel kept hammering it when I was rewatching and listening to the broadcast, and he's absolutely right. Zuby did not get enough touches in the second half. They could not guard him inside. He was having his way with their big men, and their big men were both in foul trouble. They basically the whole second half, they were both playing with 3 fouls. And then there was 5 or 6 minutes where whichever one was on the floor was playing with 4 fouls. So that was the obvious game plan to keep feeding Zuby, and it didn't happen. I think some of that has to do with point guard play and missing Dylan Darlin, who I think would have been better at getting the ball into Zuby in those spots. But we had 20 points in the paint in the first half to just 10 in the second half. So, that's almost the whole difference right there. If we could have gotten the paint, fed the paint more, fed Zuby more, perhaps things could have been different. And then, of course, I sound like a broken record. defensive rebounds. Once again, a big problem here. 13 defensive rebounds to just 12 for Auburn. To 12 offensive rebounds, rather, for Auburn. So, again, just barely over 50% with that rebounding percentage. Thankfully, Auburn didn't punish us too badly, scoring just 13 second chance points on those 12 buckets. The other issue here defensively, we just got absolutely abused in the paint. I think they had something like 44 points in the paint, maybe. And a lot of that was Pettiford getting downhill. He scored 27 points. 14 of those points were on two-pointers. So, I would imagine most of those came in the paint, probably one or two mid-rangers. But either way, 10-plus points in the paint, let's say, for Pettiford getting downhill. He, was having his way, blown by defenders, as we've seen on the perimeter time and time again. Another point to note here, Auburn shot their best three-point shooting performance of the season. They were shooting 32% as a team coming into the game. They ended up shooting 42.9% in this game from deep. And I think this game we did a much better job of defending most of those. They were hitting from logos. They were hitting from NBA range with hands in their face, etc. There just wasn't a lot of open looks for them here, but they rose to the occasion and shot it really well. Performances here, Zuby, 24, 6, and 2 with a block, 6 of 11 from the field, 1 of 2 from deep, 11 of 13 from the stripe. And Josan Sanin, 16 points, 2 boards, 2 steals on 5 of 10 from the field, and 1 of 3 from deep. I think his best performance of the season. He had a really rough start there. I think he was something like 3 of 16 for the first 2 games or something along those lines. And then, he really bounced back in this third game and played really well offensively. Like Jackson, he's got some things to work out if he wants to keep playing big minutes, especially on the defensive end. But all in all, a great offensive performance and hopefully a little spark for him to keep him going. So let's move on, recap the trip in general. Big picture sort of deal. For my money, this trip looked way too much like the Bahamas trip. You had a disappointing but really tough fought and encouraging loss in game 1 against a high-quality opponent. Came back in the second game and easily beat an inferior opponent, albeit Baylor this year is far better than Virginia last year. And then game 3, half the fans have gone home, the gym's pretty dead, pretty empty, and you lose to a team that you're more talented than in a sloppy rock fight of a game. So, I think that was, a description that could describe either last year or this year. We can only hope that this season goes as well as last season did after that disappointing Bahamas trip. I think there's reason for optimism. There's a lot of things this team is doing well, and they're a much better offensive team than last year. But the defense has a long way to go, and I think, we saw the defense take a while to gel last year, but I think you could kind of see the vision. You could see things coming together, and I think it's a little bit harder to see that on the defensive end this year, given some of the personnel, but also just the way they've played to date on the defensive end. The 2 losses is brutal. We've lost to the 3 toughest opponents we've faced. That's certainly not good from a resume perspective. It's not good from a reputation perspective. And it's just disappointing. It's, as a fan, those are the games you get yourself up for. Those are the games you want to watch and want to see. And to continually be demoralized and disappointed is, it's a hard pill to swallow, and it's something that, you'd think we'd be used to at St. John's, but we're certainly not used to it with a team of this caliber, a team that had this much expectations coming into the season. So ultimately, a lot of bit disappointing in those 3 performances. And, I've said it before, at some point, you just got to win these games. These are the games that you have to find a way to win if you want to be an elite team. And, we don't look like an elite team right now. Maybe we get there. Maybe we don't. But at the end of the day, you got to find a way to win these games. So I feel like a broken record here, but the overarching issue, if you noticed it, the thing that tied those three games together was abysmal defensive rebounding. We're supposed to have an elite front court. You've got two great big men in Mitchell and Zuby. Hopkins, also a very good rebounder from the forward position, albeit the 3 or the 4 when he's playing there. So it doesn't make any sense why it's this bad. I can understand if you're saying, well, we're not getting enough from the guards, and that's true. But you've got 3 really good big men, 3 really good forwards, and even Prey as well when he comes off the bench. Those guys need to find a way to box out and protect that rim and, clean that glass. They got to take a little more pride in it. Take a little, to continually see our guys get boxed out is, I don't know, it just can't happen. It's an inexcusable, awful, awful performance on the glass. 42 offensive rebounds in Vegas against us, and we only had 54 defensive rebounds. That's a rebounding percentage of 56.3%. For comparison, our overall defensive rebound rate is 63.6%, which is 15th percentile. So 56.3% is probably somewhere around the 5th percentile, maybe 6th or 7th if you're lucky. So completely unbecoming of a high major program to be ranked that poorly in an area that A, is fundamental to success, but B, an area where you should be good on paper based on the personnel that you have, and yet you're one of the worst teams in the country at it. It needs to be fixed. There's no excuse. We got completely punked on the boards for 3 straight games, giving teams second and third opportunities on possessions. Good teams that will punish you for that. And we're going to keep playing teams that will punish you for that, and we need to clean that up. And if we don't, then I don't think there's much of a ceiling for this team. Frankly, I think, another one win and done in the tournament if we can't clean this up. And the results in those second chance points, we talked about it. 22 points for ISU on 17 offensive rebounds, 21 for Baylor on 26, and 13 for Auburn on 12. And of course, we know what Bama did to us on second chance points as well. So let's talk about some positives. I'm not here to do moral victories. I get it, but you got to look at the positives as well. We can't just sit here and be negative and pretend that we're the worst team in Division I, because that's not the truth. The truth is the offense still looked really good. The shooting looked really good in Vegas. They were 37.3 from deep on the trip, 47 assists on 67 made buckets, also really great. That's an assist rate of 56%, on par with the season average. And obviously that season average was goosed with 3 games against low-level competition. So to see that assist rate and ball movement be maintained against top-tier competition is very encouraging. Hopkins was phenomenal for the first 2 games, so really good to see him getting into his scoring groove. The game against Baylor was just absolutely flawless from him, and on top of those offensive performances, I was just really, really happy with the way he was playing defense. He was doing a great job of keeping his man in front of him, doing a great job on switches, seemed to have a good chemistry with his teammates out there. And so, that was really good to see. And it's really, really important to the defensive scheme for Hopkins to be that far along and have picked it up that well. Sellers, 2 great shooting games. We've been waiting for him all season to just uncork it, and he did in these games, the first 2, to great success. I was calling after the Alabama game that, we needed him to shoot 5 or 6 per game, and that's, what we're getting. He shot, I think, 7 or 6 or 7 in both of the first 2 games. And I think he shot 5 in the third game, even though he only made 1, much to my chagrin, as somebody who bet Sellers over 1.5 threes, made a killing on it in the Baylor game, but because they gave it to me at plus 155 for some reason. But unfortunately, on Wednesday, he did not get it. But that's okay. Still love Sellers. Great shooting performance, and hopefully something that he can carry home with him and continue to shoot the lights out. Sanin, that third game was very encouraging from him. Hopefully he's got it going as well, something that he could take home from him, because he was painful to watch offensively. And I'm not criticizing him. It happens. The guy was taking good shots. He wasn't forcing things. Maybe only one or two bad shots in those first two games, and so I was happy with the performance. He just didn't. The shots just weren't falling for him, and that's going to happen with guys from time to time. But hopefully that Auburn game helped him snap out of it. Like I said, he had a really good performance there, efficient and pouring the points in. Offensive rebounding, another positive here. We've not been as good as we expected after last year's offensive rebounding performance. So, especially from Zuby, who's always been a great offensive glass cleaner. I mean, he lived on the offensive glass last year, put back second chance points, the whole 9 yards. So this game, it looks like, this week in Vegas, it looked like we finally maybe got back in business on that end with 12 offensive rebounds per game. So definitely encouraging there as well. A couple other sort of macro pictures here. Fouling guys out. We keep getting opposing players into foul trouble, but we're unable to get them out of the game. Versus Bama, we had Sherrill, Holloway, and Philon all finish the game with 4 fouls. They all played significant minutes with 4 fouls. Murphy and Williams-Adams, the 2 bigs for Auburn in that game, both had 4 fouls, and I think for 5 or 6 minutes straight, one of them was on the floor with 4 fouls at all times. So, the inability to foul them out. And versus ISU, we had Jefferson, Buchanan, and Torrey all finish the game with 4. So of those, I think I just mentioned 8 guys across those 3 games. The only one who fouled out was Holloway in that Bama game. And so, you need to isolate guys. I think particularly that Auburn game, it was really frustrating watching those guys play with 4 fouls and us not get the ball inside the Zuby to put the moves on them and force them into a foul or easy bucket situation, depending on what decision they made. We didn't do that, and so I think that's something that we need to be better on and focus on a little bit more moving forward. Having the players be a little more aware of that and running sets to running the offense and running the sets to make that out and to make that happen. All right, let's talk about the offense a little bit. It's something that was discussed at length on Twitter after the games. I personally believe, and I think everybody that follows me on Twitter saw, I believe that Darling is the best option to run the offense right now. I know he's not filling the stat sheet, and that is troublesome to some people, but if you watch the tape and dig into what he's doing out there, he does so many things that open things up for other people that are not just going up on the stat sheet. We're talking hockey assists. We're talking, passes that weren't credited as assists. We're talking about getting the motion started, directing traffic, those sorts of activities that you want from your quarterback, from your point guard, from your floor general. And on that rewatch for me, it's some of those little things that he did. Actually, let's backtrack here. Darling's the point guard. He is the point guard. He's been the starting point guard. He's going to be the starting point guard until somebody else proves they can do it better. And look, a small thing I noticed here when digging into some of these stats, you can go, if you have a CBB analytics account, as I do, you can look at the stats difference on the floor versus off the floor for any given player. For Dylan Darling, one stat in particular stood out for me: defensive rebound percentage. The defensive rebounding percentage which is, as we've talked about, is something we've struggled with in every game, is 8.7 percentage points better with Dylan Darling on the floor than with him off the floor. And that's not because Dylan Darling's grabbing a ton of rebounds. We've covered that. He does not fill up the stat sheet. My theory, educated theory from watching the games, is when Dylan's on the floor, Dylan is on the smallest, slowest guard they have. That's what the matchups dictate, size, speed-wise, and that's what he's going to be, and you really can't switch him off. If he gets switched off, that's a bad mismatch, and they're going to exploit it every time. So if you're not switching as much, that leaves your big men to be in better position under the basket to get those defensive rebounds. So I think there's something to be said for that as a strategy, whether Dylan is or is not on the floor, like cooling it a little bit with the switches guys. But it's more noticeable when Dylan's on the floor just because he's always fighting through the screens and there's not as much switching happening when he's on the floor. And so, that is not, it's not an insignificant number, 8.7 defensive rebounds. It's a couple of defensive rebounds per game. And look, it shows up in the defense too. More generally, I was very surprised to see that the defense is 32.5 points better per 100 possessions when Dylan Darling is on the floor versus when he is not on the floor. That's huge. It's flabbergasting. It's one of the best such percentages in the country, or one of the best such ratings in the country. I don't think it's going to hold quite that much, but again, I think there's something to be said for the defensive rebound rate improving, the big men being able to stay under the basket. I didn't look here, but if I pull it back up here, I would imagine the block rate goes up too, perhaps, with the big men more able to stay under the basket. Yep, one more block per 40 minutes with Dylan Darling on the floor. That's a 2.9 percentage point increase in block rate with Dylan Darling on the floor defensively. The steal rate goes up for obvious reasons because that's what he does. He's a ball hawk. He's in guys' pockets. That goes up 3.4 percentage points when he's on the floor. So again, all these little things start to add up as to why the defense is better with him on the floor. And, when you zoom out and look at the macro picture, he's been on the floor for the two best performances this team has put on this season, the loss to Iowa State and the win versus Baylor. He did not play in the Bama game, and he was very hobbled with a calf injury, limited him to 7 minutes in Auburn. I think it's the same calf injury that held him out of Bama. He was massaging it pregame in the layup line, and when he came out of the game in the first half, it was because after the play ended, he was bent over and was rubbing his calf, and came out of the game, came back out at halftime with a sleeve on that calf, and then didn't re-enter the game until 10 minutes into the second half maybe. And when he came out, told the coaching staff that he couldn't move. So he probably should have held himself out, spoken up for himself to not go back in that game if he knew it was going to be a problem and potentially hurt the team. So I will fault him for that, but I won't fault him for that Auburn game. And I also think you got to wonder how much it is lingering and affecting him. And, is it slowing him down a little bit? Maybe he's not quite as slow as we think he is. Maybe he'll be a little bit better when he's healthy at keeping his defensive assignment in front of him. So, something to keep an eye on and look at. But I just don't think it's a coincidence that the two games he played the most minutes in were the two best performances we've seen from this team against a quality opponent. And I know, I went back and forth with people on Twitter, plus minus. I get it. It's not an ideal stat. It's definitely a flawed stat. I'm not going to sit here and debate the merits of plus minus, but it tells a story. It tells you a story, and if you know what you're looking at and you interpret it without overreacting one way or the other, it's useful. It's helpful. And I think, it shows clearly that the team is better with Darling on the floor. And, if that continues to keep up, and for those who don't know, plus minus, very simple stat. plus for a point. When you're on the floor, you get a plus for every point your team scores and a minus for every point the other team scores while you're on the floor. It's that simple. And so for at some point, if this keeps up, if Dillon continues to put up plus ratings and among the higher plus ratings on the team for every game, at some point that's not about some kind of weird statistical anomaly or noise or anything like that. At some point, the sample size becomes big enough that you can conclusively just say that the team is better with Darling in the game. And I also think if you look at it right now on an individual basis, there's signs that I think tell you that Darling is what makes this tick and that he is impacting the game and is impacting that plus minus. So let's just look at the Baylor game, for example. Darling, plus 22 in 18 minutes. Now, that's important. 18 minutes is important because plus minus a cumulative stat. The more minutes you're on there in a victory, the more likely you are to be positive, and the more minutes you're out there in a loss, the more likely you are to be negative. And if, you get blown out, it's very likely everybody on the team's going to be a negative. So that's important to keep in mind. Darling, plus 22 in 18 minutes versus Baylor. Sellers and Bryce were plus 23 in 36 and 26 minutes, respectively. Those are guys that played most of their minutes together. I mean, Sellers was on the floor for literally the first 36 minutes of the game before he came out and rested the last 4 minutes. So he was out there, for, I would say, probably 16 of Darling's 18 minutes involved Sellers on the floor. The hypothesis that people on Twitter were throwing at me was that, oh, well, he just got to play with Hopkins and Sellers, and they were both great. Okay. Yeah. But Sellers was plus 23 in 36 minutes. He played twice as many minutes as Darling. So if Sellers' scoring was evenly distributed across his minutes, you would expect, and let's just say Darling played all 18 minutes to keep this simple. All of Darling's 18 minutes came with Sellers on the floor. What you would expect there, if Sellers' scoring was evenly distributed, you would expect his plus minus to be double what Darling's was. More or less. If the opposing team's, if Sellers' scoring and the opposing team's scoring was evenly distributed during that stretch, during his 36 minutes, you would expect them to be roughly double. At the very least, you'd expect Sellers, because he was out there for twice as many minutes, to have more. But the fact is that Sellers in the minutes that he was out there without Darling was just plus 1, or maybe plus 2 or 3, depending on how many minutes they did or did not overlap. That's not a lot. And when you're talking about a plus 23, if he got 20 of those while he was on the floor with Darling and he was only plus 3 in the other minutes, that is not coincidental. That means it probably had something to do with Darling. And I think there's logical reasons. There's things you can point to show this. So to start with, Sellers gets to shoulder some of the point guard duties when Dylan Darling's not on the floor, and I think that dilutes his potency as a shooter. I think this is something that we saw less of in Vegas because I think the staff realized that as well, and so when Darling isn't on the floor now, you see the ball more in Mitchell's hands, or you run the offense through Hopkins, or Sellers just gets less possessions on the ball, and I think that's a good thing. And the other thing I think I see is that, the more general, bigger picture here is that I don't think the other people around the point get players into good positions as well as Dylan Darling does. So yeah, he doesn't fill the stat sheet. But, hockey assists, uncredited assists, these things matter. They are parts of the game that will not show up in the stat sheet but have big impacts. For instance, there's a lot of times off of rebounds, off of made buckets, whatever the case may be, where Darling gets the ball in the backcourt and makes a long down court pass that opens up the defense. It doesn't allow the defense to get set, and then somebody like Hopkins or Sellers or Sanin or Jackson can attack the rim early before the defense is set. That's not going to show up as an assist because the guy took it off the dribble after the pass, but that does not happen without Dylan Darling. Other players on this team are not doing that as often and as well as Dylan Darling is. That is something that I saw a half dozen times in the 2 games that he played big minutes in. And sometimes it's not even credited. Sometimes it's not credited as an assist because there's one more pass off of that. So, one time he passed ahead to Hopkins, and then Hopkins made a great skip pass over to Sellers. So yeah, Hopkins got the assist, but Sellers isn't wide open if Darling doesn't make that down court pass, that long down court pass quickly before the defense is set. If the defense is set, that skip pass for Hopkins won't be there. Those are the types of things that Dylan Darling does that are not showing up on the stat sheet, but that make him so integral to this offense. There's other times where, he'll pass a guy into a good spot. He gets the ball to Zuby in the block in the spots where Zuby can be most effective, whereas other guys have a tendency to pull him out or even a complete inability to make that inlet pass to Zuby without turning it over. So, I think those were, I think that's a big part of it. A big part of why Dylan has such a big impact that doesn't show up. The other one, he doesn't fill up the stat sheet, and there's one category where you don't want to fill up the stat sheet that Dylan Darling is very good at not filling up the stat sheet, and that's turnovers. He had just 1 each against Baylor and Auburn, and zero turnovers in 24 minutes against the ball pressure of Iowa State, a team that forces a ton of turnovers. That is incredibly impressive, and that is worth a lot of plus points on its own, just taking care of the ball. And then, being there, it's something I've noticed since Darling came back, is just the way he operates as a floor general. I might clip it. I have the recording of the game on my computer. I might try to clip it and share it, but there's one point where you can literally see he passes the ball to Hopkins. He makes a little cut towards the wing, and he's literally directing Isaiah Sellers to fill in the space that he himself just vacated. And what happens? Sellers does. He's wide open. Hopkins kicks the ball back to Sellers for a 3. Those are the types of things Dylan Darling does that don't show up in the stat sheet. There's other times where you can see or hear when you're there and sitting close him barking out orders. I saw it on the film when I was rewatching it. I see it and I hear it in the arena. Those are things that don't show up in the score sheet that matter, that are important. And I get it. He's not the most athletic. He's not the sexiest player. He's not scoring 20 points a game. But right now, where we're at, he is the point guard. There's no other way about it. You can't have a guy turning the ball over 6 times per 40 minutes like Ian Jackson is, or like Ian Jackson did in Vegas, and expect to be successful. Darling is not going to razzle dazzle and fill up the score sheet. But for right now, until Jackson or somebody else proves that they can do the job as effectively, Darling is the best option we have. And I think he's good enough. I mean, I think the results prove that. The game against Baylor proved that. The game against Iowa State proved that. We were, a bounce or two, a bucket or two away, and Dylan was great in that game. So, I'm a Darling fan. I think he's doing a fine job, and I expect that to continue, at least for the foreseeable future. I will say though, after Darling, the next best option I think right now is kind of the point guard by committee, but mostly of the big men. I'm not including Jackson in that. So for me, that's really just Mitchell, Zuby, and Hopkins. And, Mitchell, the point forward, Mitchell does this probably the best. He's probably the better of the 3, but, I mentioned the inlet pass to Zuby. He had a terrible turnover on one where he just basically threw it right to the Auburn guy. So he's not without his flaws at that position, and it can take him away from the offensive glass. So it has some downsides there. They ran the offense through Hopkins a lot in Vegas, more than I think we've seen to this point in the season, and I like that. I think he was pretty good with the ball in his hands. I think he was capable, and yeah, he can get downhill. He was taking guys off the bounce and looked decent enough in that role. Zuby, not really playing traditional point guard, but what we did see a lot of is Zuby at the top of the key, handling the ball, doing dribble handoffs, directing traffic, and I thought that was very effective as well. But again, there's a lot of times where you want Zuby just down low, banging, drawing fouls, cleaning the glass offensively, and that kind of can take him out of that game. And so, that is another one with a downside that I think, again, warrants Dylan Darling continuing to be that starting point guard for 25 minutes a game for the foreseeable future. On the rewatch, though, I will say I think I'm as encouraged as I've been to date about Ian Jackson's abilities, his skills, and whether he can be the point guard. I'm definitely a little bit more bullish on it. I wouldn't say I'm bullish in general, but I think offensively his game looked really good in Vegas. His defense was still atrocious, and as mentioned, he had 6 turnovers per 40 in Vegas, so a lot to clean up there if he wants to get more minutes. But what I did see was some really good passing, and what I did see was some really good shot creation for himself when he had the ball in his hands. There was a couple of really nice, kind of pinned down screens where, pinned down dribble handoff, where he came running around Zuby and spotted up for the 3. He had a step back 3 a couple times. And so, those signs were all encouraging. And when he gets downhill, a couple of times he came off that Zuby pin down and stepped into a 3. Other times he came around it and just raced downhill. And, with his speed and athleticism, getting to the rim was easy for him in Vegas. And so I think that's, something that's going to be important for us offensively. I mentioned earlier, I don't think we have that alpha like a Pettiford or a Philon or a Lipsy, but Jackson could be that guy. He's got the skills. He has to want it, and he has to, do the things on the other end of the floor that are going to keep him in Rick's good graces, that are going to keep him getting minutes and are going to get him more than the 17 minutes per game that we saw from him in Vegas. Because if Ian Jackson's going to go the whole year playing 17 minutes per game, then again, that's another thing that just really caps the ceiling of this team's potential. So his line down there, 8.7 points, 2 boards, and just under an assist per game in, like I said, 17 minutes. 55.6% from the field and 40% from deep, though. So that's really good, very efficient, not ball hogging or taking shots or taking bad shots. So, again, I think the offense with Jackson is really good. I liked what I saw from some of his passes as well. Again, not a ton of assists there, but some really good passes that didn't end in assists because of a missed basket or whatever, as well as a couple of really nice assists that found guys in the back door and stuff like that. But again, the defense was atrocious. I think particularly the pick and roll defense. He seems like he's never been put in a pick and roll before by an offense. At least 2 or 3, maybe even more times in Vegas, I watched him just stand next to the screener while his man blew by him and went down the lane for an easy bucket. I don't know if he was expecting help or if he was expecting a switch or what, but he was just completely flat-footed there in the screen situation and got blown by for an easy 2. I don't know why that is. I'm sure that's something staff has on tape and are going to watch with him, but it's not pretty defensively. And of course, the other thing with Ian is the turnovers. He's got to cut those down. All right, so let's start to wrap this up. Stat of the day. why change it now? We've hammered on the defensive rebounding this entire episode. It's the single biggest thing to talk about with this team. It needs to be better. It needs to be continuously monitored, and we will continue to monitor it until it improves. So currently, defensive rebound percentage is sitting at 63.6%, 15th percentile nationally. Just absolutely atrocious. I think I mentioned that stat earlier, so there it is again. And since, that's boring, let's do a bonus stat of the day. 3-point attempts per game. Only 22.4 3-point attempts per game this season. That's 42nd percentile nationally. Sellers is now shooting 48.3%. Sannon 43.5%. Jackson 39.3%. And Bryce 30.3%. And that's not great, 30.3%, but he is 6 of his last 15, which is 40%. So he's starting to come around. Even Zuby and Prey, low volume, but they're shooting 42.9% and 50% respectively. So, they're more than capable of hitting, and we simply need to shoot more three-pointers. I mean, when you are and are capable of shooting three-pointers that well, you need to shoot more than 22.4% of them. It's that simple. I think we've got too many guys that like to drive into traffic, and I think we need to be a little more cognizant and recognize situations that present themselves for more of the drive and kick variety. Even if, it's a Zuby or a Prey or Hopkins out there on the perimeter, those guys are all capable of hitting an open one, and so, we need to see more of that. All right, let's do the game balls for these three. ISU struggled with this one. It could have gone either way, Zuby or Sellers, but for reasons that will become clear in a second, I wanted to make sure I gave Sellers his flowers because he was really great down there, and so he gets my game ball in this one. 20 and 5, 5 boards, 5 of 6 from deep. Just a really fantastic performance, and the number one reason we were able to keep it that close. Versus Baylor, this was the Bryce Hopkins game. 26 points, 5 boards, 5 assists with a steal and a block. 9 of 12 from the field, 3 of 3 from deep. There was a point when he had 26 points, I said, oh man, there's still, I don't know what it was, 8 minutes left or something, let's say. I was like, oh man, we're going to get a Hopkins 30 piece. And then he just slowed down, and ultimately we played a smaller backup heavy lineup down the stretch of that game with the lead that we did have. Finally, the Auburn loss. Zuby looked like Zuby in this game. One of his best performances of the year so far. 24 points, 6 boards, 2 assists. He had a block. 6 of 11 from the field, 1 of 2 from deep, and that miss from deep was the tough fadeaway at the buzzer. Also, he had 11 points from the stripe on 13 trips. Moving on to the Schadenfreude Minute, my favorite segment. For those who don't know, this is the segment of the show where we check in with our former Big East colleagues and rivals and see how they are doing in their new leagues. Let's check in with our neighbors up in Canada, the Syracuse Orange. They also made the trek out to Vegas, and to their credit, they did fight hard in a 4-point loss to Houston in their first game. But they followed that up by losing by 11 to a Kansas team without Darren Peterson, and then they got absolutely murdered by Iowa State. 31-point victory for the Cyclones. I think it was 96-65 or 95-64, something along those lines. So that was a rough trip for Syracuse. 0-3 out in Vegas. That trip coming hot on the heels of Cuse barely handling Monmouth up in the Dome. That was a 78-73 contest. But Frank, they left the Big East for football. Surely it's going better for them on the gridiron, right? Wrong. Syracuse football just wrapped up a 3-9 season, 1-7 in a very bad ACC, finishing dead last in the conference. The Saturday before the Players era felt like rock bottom for Cuse football, losing to Notre Dame 70-7. That was the worst loss in program history since the second Grover Cleveland administration. That's right, 1893, the last time Cuse lost that bad, when they lost 66-0 to Union College. I believe they're D2 or 3 now, so there you go. Tough to be an Orange fan these days. Next up for the Johnnies, another SEC opponent, Ole Miss, this coming Saturday, December 6th. That game, 8 p.m. Little bit about Ole Miss here. Ole Miss, they really like to slow the pace down. They are 18th percentile in the country in pace. For comparison, we are 95th percentile. So it'll be a pace battle. It's definitely a lot easier to slow teams down than it is to speed them up. So, we're going to have our hands full with trying to dictate that pace in a way that works better for us. Ole Miss also really, really good on the offensive glass. They're taking in 34.6% of their offensive rebound opportunities. That's in the 75th percentile, and they're scoring 13.6 second chance points per game. That's in the 80th percentile. So, that's a team that's really going to test our defensive rebounding abilities. Malik Dia is a force inside. My apologies, I forget the other big man they have, but the Johnnies will definitely have their hands full on the defensive glass, trying to prevent Ole Miss from getting any second chance points. Ole Miss also really good with the ball. They average just 9.9 turnovers per game, which is the 89th percentile. So, we always want to turn teams over. It's something that we're decent at. Going to be a struggle here. And then finally, we have a tendency to try to force things in traffic at the rim. I just mentioned, I'd like to see a little more kickouts. We end up getting blocked a lot in there, and so, we need to not force, try to dodge those blocks, and that's going to require patience and ball movement in the half court, and that also plays into a weakness. Ole Miss really does allow a lot of ball movement, a lot of assists there. A lot of assists. And they also allow a lot of three-point attempts. So, again, these are things that I harped on above when talking about things that we need to work on: shooting more threes, cleaning the defensive glass. This is a team that will allow you to shoot a lot of threes and give up those threes at a high clip. And they're a team that is going to test us on the defensive glass. So, it's an interesting matchup. It's a game that you look at this, just the plain old rankings, and you say, okay, well, this should be, a pretty easy Johnnies victory at home. But when you dig into some of this granular stuff and see what a good offensive rebounding team they are, that's definitely something that gives me hesitation and gives me a little bit of pause and makes me think, okay, maybe this is going to be a little more tougher than I thought. But ultimately, you got to win this game. This is practically a must-win at this point. You're 1-3 against high major competition. You've lost to the three best teams that you've faced. You've lost to two SEC teams, and you got two more SEC teams on the schedule, starting with Ole Miss. Again, game you have to win. If you want to be considered as good as we think we are, we need to win this game. It starts on Saturday. 8 p.m. tip. I'll probably get started around 4 or 4:30 at Sullivan's. Hope to see you there. Go Johnnies.